Greetings everyone and welcome to a new lesson. Today we're diving into an intriguing topic. Let's begin. In the previous lesson, we introduced one of the most crucial elements of design, tonal values. As explained, tonal values indicate how light or dark something appears on a grayscale ranging from white to black. But what is the relationship between tonal values on an object? Why do they have that specific tonal value and not another? Why are they positioned where they are and not elsewhere? What determines the proximity of two values and how they communicate with each other? The answer lies in the anatomy of light of an object. Let's recap what we've discussed previously. Light begins its journey from a light source, interacts with the object, and forms tonal values based on how it interacts with the object's surface. These tonal values are crucial as they dictate how light reflects and how the object appears to the viewer. The light then continues its path, bouncing off the object's surface and eventually reaching the viewer's eyes. Through this process, the viewer gains a complete understanding of the object's visual characteristics, including its texture, shape, and depth. In scenes featuring simple geometric shapes, such as a sphere illuminated by a single light source, distinct patterns can be observed on the object's surface. Put simply, the resulting tonal value map is highly predictable. Within this pattern, we can distinguish two main categories of values: the family of lights and the family of shadows. The family of lights includes all areas of the object directly illuminated by the light source, while the family of shadows comprises areas that do not receive direct light and therefore appear darker. This interplay of lights and shadows, which forms on the surface of an illuminated object, constitutes what we define as the anatomy of light of an object. This anatomy of light enables us to understand and predict how light interacts with the object, revealing its shape and three-dimensional characteristics. When you observe the human face, you are looking at an organic form that exhibits many of the patterns found in simpler geometric shapes. These fundamental forms help us better understand how light and shadow behave on more complex surfaces. Understanding these similarities enables us to apply the same lighting and shading principles, improving our ability to accurately capture the three-dimensional features of a human face. Let's dive into the heart of today's lesson, the light anatomy of a cube. I've chosen the cube as our starting form because it's the simplest to understand and analyze. Among the three visible faces of the cube, two clearly show distinct tonal values. However, on the shaded face, we can observe two tonal values blending closely together. This unique feature makes the cube an ideal subject for studying how light interacts with surfaces. Its flat planes and sharp edges offer a clear view of the transitions between light and shadow. When dealing with a cube, it's more appropriate to use the term planes of the cube rather than faces of the cube. In this case, we can observe 3 planes out of 6 because the cube has been drawn using a 2-point perspective. Notice also how there are no contour lines separating the planes of the cube. This separation is solely delineated by the change in tonal values between each plane. The complete absence of contour lines is a key concept in hyperrealistic drawing, which, as the term suggests, aims for a faithful representation of reality. In the real world, we observe objects not through distinct outlines, but by perceiving their form through tonal values. The same principle applies to portraits. Each element is distinguished from others solely through tonal values. Let's begin analyzing the light anatomy of the cube, starting with the family of lights. The point where the light hits the object directly is called the highlight, and it is the brightest point of the object because it is perpendicular to the light source. The highlight is crucial as it defines the light's intensity and direction. It helps in understanding how light interacts with the object's surface, providing a clear indication of the light source's position. Being a reflection of light, the highlight will shift based on your position relative to the object. For example, 2 people positioned at different points in the scene observing the same cube will perceive the highlight in different locations on its surface. The viewer on the right might see the entire top plane illuminated, while the viewer on the left might notice the highlight only on one of the cube's edges. This is particularly important in live drawing, as each artist will see the highlight positioned uniquely. There are primarily 3 types of highlights that can occur on a cube. The first is the single plane highlight, which happens when a plane is directly exposed to the light and is fully illuminated, resulting in a pure highlight. The second type is the crest light highlight, where the highlight appears as an edge highlight, positioned along the edge dividing 2 planes. This occurs when the light source strikes the edge at an angle, creating a bright line along the boundary between the 2 planes. This type of highlight accentuates the cube's edges and helps in defining the geometric structure of the object. Lastly, The multiplane highlight is located at a corner where three different planes converge. This occurs when the light source hits the corner at an angle, illuminating the intersection of the three planes. Let's continue our analysis by considering a cube that features a crest light highlight. The next aspect within the family of lights is the direct light. This term describes the region of the shape that receives illumination directly from the light source without any obstructions. This part of the object is fully exposed to the light, resulting in a bright and well-lit surface. The third element in the family of lights is the midtone, or halftone. The midtone represents the average value of the object's pure color. It lies between the direct light and the core shadow, characterized by being an intermediate shade between light and darkness. When we refer to the midtone, we are talking about the region that lies between light and shadow. This area receives a certain amount of light, but not at its maximum intensity. Let's now move on to the family of shadows. The first element we examine is the core shadow, or form shadow. This term refers to the point on the object's surface where light can no longer reach directly, creating a shadow that defines the form itself. In the case of a cube, the core shadow is found on the opposite face relative to the main light source. Transitioning to the second element of the shadow family, the cast shadow or projected shadow. This type of shadow occurs when the illuminated object creates a shadow projection on surrounding surfaces. In this scenario, the light is obstructed by the object and cannot reach the surface beyond it, such as the table on which the illuminated object is placed. The third element of the shadow family is reflected light. This occurs when light emitted from a source bounces off surrounding surfaces and strikes the illuminated object. Every side of the cube is affected by reflected light, but this phenomenon is most noticeable when the reflected light strikes the area marked as the core shadow, as this region is darker and provides sufficient contrast. Light travels through space and reflects off surrounding surfaces, but with each reflection, it loses some strength and intensity. White or glossy surfaces reflect the most light, while matte or black surfaces reflect the least. The last element is occlusion, which denotes the darkest point within the projected shadow. It occupies a position in a corner where neither direct nor reflected light can reach. Now that we can identify the different elements of light on the surface of the cube, we also need to understand which tonal values we can associate with each of them and how they interact with each other. Let's start with the simplest, the highlight. As mentioned earlier, the highlight is the point with the lightest tonal value across the entire figure. It's what we might call pure white. Therefore, I assign the tonal value of 10 to the highlight. Moving on to the direct light. This area is directly struck by the light source, so it's appropriate to choose a tonal value that falls within the category of tints. For the direct light, I would opt for a mid-range tint value, specifically an 8. Let's now move on to the last element of the light family, the midtone. This part receives light, but not directly. Therefore, the midtone will be slightly darker than the directly illuminated area, but not dark enough to be considered part of the tonal values known as shades. I choose a value of 7 for the midtone. It's important to note that the midtone leans more towards tints than shades in terms of brightness. Let's now delve into the shadow family, starting with the core shadow. This region receives no direct light from the main light source. To assign the appropriate tonal value, I'll choose from the darker shades. I assign it a value of 3, representing an average shade tone. Assigning the value to the cast shadow is straightforward. I definitely need to look among the shades. It's not darker than the core shadow, but also not lighter, so I assign it a value of 3. Let's move on to the penultimate element, the reflected light. This is a key element whose correct inclusion in the work can significantly enhance its quality. Let's reason together. We've established that reflected light occurs when light bounces off surrounding surfaces and strikes the cube. To be a noticeable light element within that plane, it must have a tonal value lower than the core shadow, which we assigned a value of 3. Therefore, I assign a value of 4 to the reflected light. The last element, often overlooked by artists, is occlusion. In this area, light does not reach in any way, not even through reflection. It's the darkest point in the entire analysis, and I assign it a value of 2. I refrain from using the value 1 because, in my opinion, it should be used sparingly, akin to the full value 10, and reserved only for small areas where very strong contrasts are desired. Thank you so much everyone for following along. I hope you found this lesson helpful. See you in the next lesson.